let's get to the main event. Let's talk about your trip to Peru in the 1980s. Let's walk us through that adventure.
Yeah. So this story is about the 8 days I spent in jail in Lima, Peru. And you may think, whoa, what a tragic tale. This is terrible. But there are twists and turns and happy endings in this story. I have probably told it 300 times. And no one has ever come away thinking, I was bored. A number of people have said this is the best story I've ever heard. So, before you prejudge what it might be like to sit in a Peruvian jail for 8 days, sit back and relax and listen to this story. The story begins in 1984. I was campaign manager for Al Gore, who was running for Senate in Tennessee. And it was great. I'd worked in Mississippi for good guys who are hard to elect in that state. In Tennessee, by comparison, was easy. We got 63% of the vote. But I had never traveled outside of the United States. And so I decided, the campaign's over. I've got all this time. I've put a little money away. I'm going to go visit South America. So I flew down there by myself. I went to Ecuador. I went to Chile. I went to Argentina. I went to Uruguay. And I went to Carnival at Rio in 1985. This was a great time to visit South America because they had mostly thrown out their military juntas, and in Argentina they had this huge avenue that ran right through the middle of town. It was probably a city block wide, and everyone was gathered out there celebrating that they had elected Alfonsine to be their president, and all these military people were gone. It was a great experience. At Rio, I met a girl there, and she took me around, and we danced down Ipanema Beach in the Communist Party Samba Parade, which not many people can claim to have done. Anyway, this was great. I went back to the United States. I looked for another campaign, ended up starting a business on my kitchen table in an efficiency apartment with a rented computer and 2 overdrawn credit cards, and turned it eventually into the largest business of its kind in the country. But I enjoyed South America so much that I had planned to go back. A friend of mine, John Jameson, he had heard about my trip and he asked if he could join me. And I said, sure. And then later, there were 2 events that happened that have a lot of bearing on this story. One was John had lost his passport, and he called me about a week before we were ready to leave, and I said, well, you just got to go. You can get expedited passports if you pay $150, and you just got to go to the embassy and do that, which he did. The other thing was, about a week before he left, he told me his brother, Stuart, had been depressed, and he was wondering if we could bring Stuart on the trip. And I said, sure, no problem at all. Anyway, we get down, we go to Argentina first. Argentina is just a great country. I mean, it's screwed up in a lot of ways. There's a joke that they tell on themselves in Argentina, and it goes like this. God is creating the world, and he's down there and he's working on South America. And one of his helpers comes up to him and says, oh Lord, who am I to question your wisdom, but I just have to ask. Here's this one country. You've given them half of the great farmland on the whole continent. You've given them 2,000 miles of the most beautiful coastland anyone has ever seen. You've given them mineral resources. You've given them all of these things. Don't you think that's just too much for one country? And God kind of chuckles and says, wait till you see the people I'm going to put there. They don't eat until 10 o'clock at night. They party all night. I don't know when any work gets done. But if you walk down those pedestrian streets at 4 in the morning, they're still crowded. It's a crazy country. We got there, and we were having a good time, but we went to get train tickets to take us over the Andes to Chile. And while we were waiting in line, we met this family, and we had a conversation, and they said, "Oh, why don't you guys come to New Year's Eve at our house?" And they gave us directions, and we go, "Sure." And we went down. We caught a train to go down there. As we approached the station, which their station was the very end of the line, as we approached the station, we were standing on kind of the outside, on the rails where you dismount the cars, and the train was kind of slowly coming to a stop, and Stuart Jameson jumped off the train before it stopped, and John jumped off the train before it stopped, and what was I going to do? You know, I couldn't be the male coward in our group. So I jumped, but I had a champagne bottle in my hand, which caused me to lose my balance and hit the sidewalk in an awkward way. As it turned out, I had broken my arm. And so we went to this house and met with this family and everyone. We partied, but as the night wore on, it hurt more and more. So the next morning, they took me to a hospital where they x-rayed it, discovered it was broken, and put a cast on my arm. And that was all fine and good. We left Argentina. We went to Chile. Chile was a lot of fun as well. And then we went up to Peru, to Cuzco, which was where the Inca Empire was begun. And we kicked around Cuzco. We went to Machu Picchu, but we had planned from Cuzco to fly to Lima and catch a plane to take us to Ecuador. Well, you know, in South America, these schedules don't often work. And so we ended up spending a night in Lima because we missed our connection to fly to Ecuador. Well, we get there about 5 in the morning. Our plane leaves at 7. They say in South America to be there 2 hours early. So we go in, we check in with the at the ticket desk. We get our boarding passes, and we go and we sit back down in the lobby. About 10 or 15 minutes after we checked in, a bunch of guys in khaki uniforms came from the back behind the ticket counters, and they asked us to follow them to the back, which we did. We didn't think anything of it. I was taken to an examination room, and everything in my luggage was gone. They went through everything in my luggage and also tested anything that had any liquid character. You know, they put my toothpaste in a test tube and shook it up and all of that. And I was kind of amazed. I'd never seen a civil servant in South America work that hard. But they did all of that. Everything was okay, and said, "You can go." And I walked out into the hall, and I heard a commotion on the other side of the hall. And I walked in, and there were all these guys in these khaki uniforms that were going, "Tango gringo con cocaína, cocaína." And what they had done is, my friend John had warts burned off his hands before he left, and his mother had gone to Fred's Dollar Store in Eupora, Mississippi, and bought him handy wipes. They had opened the handy wipes, squeezed them into a test tube, and they tested positive for cocaine. Well, one of the first things they noticed when I walk in is I have a cast on my arm, a suspicious device. And so they brought me to the place where you put your luggage through and it gets scanned, and I had to kind of lay on the conveyor belt and stick my arm out there, and they had a picture, and they were all discussing whether looked like there was cocaine inside. And so I said, "Look, just take me to a medical facility, let them cut off the cast, you can look inside, see if you see anything, and they can put a new cast on, and I'll pay for it." So that's what they did. They took me to this doctor's office. The doctor did an X-ray. He posted it on the wall. All these customs police, they were looking at it. They were laughing because there was not an obvious break that showed on the X-ray. But the doctor came out and he pointed to exactly where the break was and all of that. So they put a new cast on and we drove back to the airport. But they also put my old cast in a plastic bag and carried it with them. We got back there and I made it just in time to participate in a press conference. What had happened was in Peru, the U.S. government had been pressuring the Peruvians to do something about drug trafficking at the airport. And all of a sudden, they put in a new customs director. This was probably not 12 hours before this whole incident unfolded with us. And John had made a mistake. He figured, well, if I let them know that I'm really important in America, then they'll go easy on me, which was just the opposite of what happened. He told them, which was true, that he was a campaign manager for a U.S. senator, and you know, this was red meat in front of a pack of starving dogs. So we had a press conference. We had 4 TV stations there. We had newspapers there. It was a big crowd, and it was the new custom director's opportunity to show off. So he does this press conference. He points out that John is a high-ranking U.S. official. One of us had one of those tubes. They don't make them anymore, but they used to have these. Your toothpaste was in a pump, and so he held this up and he pulled out his pocket knife and popped off the bottom to show that inside this was a good place where you could hide drugs. He also found John's earlier passport in the bottom of his bag. It was one of these nylon bags, and it had the cardboard bottom, and he lifted up the cardboard bottom and found the second passport. So he had John with 2 passports, and one of which had countries where you would go to find drugs, and the other is completely clean. So, you know, this went on for a while. We were kind of amazed because, you know, we worked in campaigns and we would do these press conferences where we would perhaps a little unfairly attack our opponent and take evidence and blow it up. And all of a sudden, this was happening to us. But anyway, they finished. I told them I was a clerk at the Postal Service. You know, I wasn't going to claim any. I knew better than to claim any stature here. So we go back to this room where we're being held, and I look, and there's this really little guy. He's probably 5'1", and he obviously hated Americans because he just glared at us with a lot of hostility. He had a pair of tweezers and testing fluid, and he had my cast. And he went through the cast layer by layer, you know, the gauze by gauze. And after about 2 hours, he got a positive test on my cast. And later he got a positive test on my Cutter insect repellent. Well, so things weren't looking all that great. They brought in bilingual flight attendants to question us about where we got the drugs. You know, and we would have these circular conversations. The flight attendant would say, "Well, Mr. Malchow, where did you get these drugs?" And I would say, "Well, we don't have any drugs." She would say, "Of course you have drugs. We've just run tests, and the tests show that you have drugs." And, you know, the conversation would go on and on like this. A little later, we got to airport, I think about 5 in the morning. About 5 in the afternoon, the embassy shows up. And, we've been waiting. We figured, the embassy might come to our rescue. We didn't know all the background about the lobbying on the drug traffic. 3 people from the embassy show up, and they sort of stand in the back of the room. They don't come talk to us or anything. They're just observing with not happy expressions on their faces. And eventually they turn us over to a Mayor Zapata, who was an officer with the Lima police. And there was a fortunate circumstance in that the Lima police did not get along with the customs police at the airport. So they felt, Mayor Zapata felt no need to protect the customs. He could look at the situation and make his judgment. The way it works in Peru is if you're accused of a crime, a felony, they assign a police officer to investigate, and he has 15 days to determine whether or not there's probable cause to bring you to trial. So all of that was in Mayor Zapata's hands. He took us up to his office and talked to us for a little while. He gave us some of our money back. He said, while you're in jail, you're going to have to pay the guards to go get you food, because if you have to eat what they will serve you, this won't be a good thing. He sort of described some of the customs in the cell, which I'll get into a little later. What's it going to be like? Then we climb into his Ford Bronco and we start driving around Lima. It was probably close to an hour before we finally got to this location where they had a laboratory. And what this was about was to take blood test and urine test from us to determine if there's any cocaine in our system or any other drugs in our system. And we're kind of nervous about this because while we're in Cusco, the customary traditional drink is mate de coca, which doesn't really make you high or have the effects of cocaine, but which is cocaine sourced. And so we're going, oh shit, we may test positive because of this. But we go through that, and then we climb back into the Ford Bronco and drive around for another 30 minutes till we come till the vehicle stops at a house. Now the house is a nice middle-class home, in a nice middle-class neighborhood. And we're looking at each other, I think of what you would imagine if you're being taken to jail in Lima, Peru. My imagination was that you would have this structure with 3 stories with concrete blocks covered with mold and slime and rats jumping out the windows between the bars. This was a nice house, and we didn't want to kind of jump up and high five each other, but we were feeling, things are in great shape. So we walk in, they take us out, we're handcuffed, they walk us through the front door, and there's stairs going up to a second floor, and I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe we have bunk beds on the second floor. This is going to be nice. But we walk past the stairs and out the back door. And out the back door is a building where the previous owner, who was a drug dealer, whose property was confiscated by the police, there was a building where the washer and dryer had been. Well, they took out the washer and dryer, put a door on it with bars, locked it, and so there was a 6x10 space. And they opened it up, and we looked, and there were 12 people already in there. So we just kind of, skirt to the back of the cell and, didn't sleep particularly well that evening. And but in the morning, do you remember Cool Hand Luke, where the guard comes and he's got a tin cup and he runs it back and forth across the bars? Exactly what happened in the morning. Some guy shows up. He's got a bag of rolls for breakfast. He's got a thermos with coffee, and he runs his cup back and forth, passes these things through the cell, but he also passes 4 newspapers through the cell. And I'm looking at this, I'm going, you mean we get newspaper service here? Well, the reason we have this newspaper service is we're on the front page of 3 of the newspapers, and we're on the inside front page of the 4th. The story goes as follows. High-ranking American officials busted for possession of cocaine. To determine how much cocaine we were carrying, they took my cast plus my cutter insect repellent plus John's handy wipes, put them on a postal scale. I think it was 65 grams, something like that, and then multiplied that weight times their estimate of the street value of cocaine in Miami, Florida. Well, this was millions of dollars, and which all in all was a good thing, because all of a sudden we had instant respect in that cell. No one was going to fuck with us because they thought there was some big drug cartel that we were working for, and if they even gave us the slightest bit of trouble, that the cartel would come and shoot all the guards and shoot half the prisoners. No one wanted to screw with us at all. It took us a little bit of time to understand this, but that was the case. So we're sitting in there that first morning, and someone comes to the door and they say, there's a representative of the American embassy here. Which one of you are going to talk to this person? So, I'm kind of the oldest person, and so I went and talked to her. This was the consul. The consul is the second highest position in an embassy after the ambassador. And she is in no mood to be nice to us. Here they were, they worked so hard to get reform at the airport, and the first thing that happens is they're spread over, the U.S. officials smuggling cocaine is spread over all the newspapers and on TV and everything. So I go down and I sit down with her in the living room of this house, and I'm talking 90 miles an hour. I'm going, listen, you need to get somebody down to that lab and make sure these tests are fairly done. I'm going like this. And she says, shut up, and let me tell you where you're going to spend the next 20 years of your life. And she describes the process that they have 15 days to determine probable cause. If they find probable cause, you are moved to the basement of the courthouse, which houses 5,000 prisoners in open space. The time it takes, once they determine they have probable cause to bring you to trial, you can wait 5 or 6 years for the trial. Then she described some other place, that you go if you get convicted, and oh man, it was nothing like this floor of the courthouse, right? No telling what happens out there and how many people get stabbed or whatever. Anyway, this was not a happy beginning. But I thought, okay, look, we're innocent. None of these charges are true. If I end up in in this bottom of the courthouse or in this other prison, I got plenty of time to be sad about it. You got to keep your head up in these situations. I went back. I told Stuart and John, what I learned, and they were, of course, alarmed. But we kept our stuff together. life in the cell. So, 6 feet wide, 10 feet long. When we went in, we made 15. You could not sleep on your back or your stomach. You had to sleep on your side, just like a sardine, right? And there was a pair of feet in front of you and a pair of feet behind you. And even if the prisoners on either side of you had the most excellent hygiene in the world, that hygiene, by the time they got to the cell and were in there for several days, was gone, right? So, bad smelling feet, the discomfort, and then, your body, if you're laying down on your side, your body collects on one side, and your blood collects on one side, and you have a need to turn over. And this was, you had to be flipper. You had to jump up, turn over, and come back down and hope you didn't land directly on top of the person next to you. And being unaware that they were terrified of us, you had some worry that you would get into some altercation. Fortunately, I had this cast on my arm, and so they gave me the slot by the door, because I had apparently the first night had clubbed people, and no one wanted to be next to me at night. There was also, it was strange, because here you have this facility where people go in and they stay no more than 15 days. And you would think there would not be an ongoing culture to all of this, that people would be making it up as they came in. But this wasn't true. One of the pieces of the culture was that if someone brought food into the house, let's say you're in the jail and your aunt brings a fish stew into the cell. Well, if there are 15 people, the fish stew is divided into 15 pieces and shared by everyone. And there was a lot of that traffic, relatives coming in and bringing food. We also sometimes would pay the guards money to bring food in, but even though we were paying the money, we had to split it equally. John and Stuart were afraid that if they ate the food, they would get Montezuma's revenge, and this would be really uncomfortable. My viewpoint was, look, if I'm gonna get Montezuma's revenge, it's better to get it now than when I'm on this open floor with 5,000 other prisoners. So they would always pass food back for the tres gringos, right? The 3 gringos, and John and Stuart would not always refuse the food, but were very careful and not eating much and this sort of thing. And by the time we got out, they had both lost 10 pounds, and I'd gained some weight because I was getting more than my share. This was pretty much the first day. The second day, we had another event. The second day, we had another visitor for the embassy. This time, not the person at the top of the chart, but this was the person at the bottom of the chart. She was a Foreign Service officer. This was her second tour of duty. She'd been somewhere in Singapore or the Far East for the first 2 years, and now she was in Lima. She was really interesting. She was a Yale graduate. She was 29 years old. She's very attractive, and she was empathetic. So I told her our story, what had happened, just not a doubt in her mind that I was telling her the truth, and she was completely sympathetic to our situation. And she says, "Well, what can I bring you?" And I go, "A bar of soap," right? Some of us, not everyone every day, but some of us got access to a shower, which really wasn't a shower, but sort of this line of water that came out of this pipe, and a towel. And also, I said, we need some trash novels. We had 3 books in there. One of them was 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, which is not the best present reading. The second one was Moby Dick. And I tell you, you know, you're sitting there in jail with all these other people. You're kind of trying to pass the time, and you open a book and you get to a chapter that's 30 pages long, and it's all about knots. You know, was not the ideal reading material. So she brought us some trash novels, and this was great. She came back every day and visited, and we hit it off. You know, we were chatting it up, and she wanted to learn about my story, and I learned about hers, and all of this. So this was nice. In the meantime, this is what was happening back home. My mother was getting calls from people, multiple calls, from people who said, send me $30,000 and I can get your son out of jail. You know, fortunately, she didn't do that. A friend of ours who worked at a big law firm in Washington, my brother contacted that friend and said, can you get Hal and Stuart and John a lawyer? And so this was a big firm. They've got contacts all around the world. They called and they got 2 lawyers in Lima who were criminal lawyers, who were good lawyers. You really had no right to see a lawyer during that 15-day period. You could only see them once probable cause was established. But Mayor Zapata, he was a good guy. He didn't care. He let us meet with the lawyers, and this was a good thing. They seemed competent. You know, they said we really can't do anything yet. They talked Mayor Zapata into letting us call our parents, and that was a good thing. My mother at the time had Alzheimer's disease. It was undiagnosed, but it was reasonably advanced. It was not long after I got back. She got lost in a parking lot and tried to walk home in a town that she had lived in for 50 years, and got lost. And they picked her up, but Alzheimer's is very sensitive to stress, and so this was really hard on her. Anyway, so we this goes on and on. Finally, on the 7th day, Mayor Zapata comes to the cell and calls me out to talk to me, and he says, we have results of the drug test. And he says, they're all negative. And, and I'm pretty happy. So I said, can we get out right now? And he goes, no, we have paperwork we have to do, da-da-da. And so I said, well, by this time, there are 23 people in this cell. There's not even room to sardine. You know, there are people who are sitting up all night and sleeping in a seated position. I said, well, can we sleep in the living room on the floor, right? He goes, yeah, okay. So the 3 of us get out and we're sleeping on the living room floor, and each one of us is like this, right? All completely spread eagle. That's just one of the finest nights of sleep that we've ever had. You know, all this space, no smelly feet, and no smelly toes scratching your nose. It was great. So the next morning, our attorneys show up, and one of them asked me, "Where do you want to go?" I said, take us to the nicest hotel in Lima. You know, we didn't care what we spent at this point, you know. So we drive to this hotel. We park out front, and we walk inside, and there's a guy at the check-in desk, and he's kind of looking through papers and this sort of thing. And remember, we haven't shaved or bathed or change clothes for 8 days, right? So he's back there and he goes, looks up and sees us, jumps out from behind the desk and goes, out, out, and chases us out. And so, the lawyer said, well, where do you want to go now? I go, well, take us to the second best hotel in Lima. And they took us there, but instead of trying to check, and instead of sending us to the check-in desk, they checked us in, got the keys, let us in the back door. We went up the stairways and we each went to our own room, right? Where we got a shower, we washed up, we shaved, it was fabulous. Well, I'm just about finished shaving and dressing. I have my luggage, so I had some clean clothes, and I get a call. And the call is from the Inga, the State Department employee who I kind of hit it off with, and she says, "Hal, I hear you're out." And I go, "Yeah." She says, "Can you be down in front of the hotel in 10 minutes?" I go, "Yeah." And she picks me up, gives me a tour of Lima. We completely hit it off. I never spent a night at that hotel. If you work for the State Department, even if you're the least senior person of the Foreign Service officers, you live well. She lived in an apartment on the shore where the waves crashed against the rocks. It was 8 stories high, and she had half of the 8th floor. It was great. And so we were spending a lot of time together from that point forward, which led to interesting conversations, because John and Stuart were desperate to get home, and they would say, I'm sure they can get the paperwork done by tomorrow, and then we can fly out tomorrow night. And my response was always, no. Things don't work that fast here in Peru. It's going to be at least a week or 2 before we can get out of here, right? And so we went back and forth with that conversation. But finally I could hold out no longer. The paperwork was there, and I couldn't say, well, I really want to stay here in Peru. So we got on a plane. I flew to New Orleans, where my mother picked me up, and I could comfort her, and then we got back to Washington. We had assumed that news about all of this would have hit Washington and been a big story and all of that. So I called up my friend Bill Hassler. He worked for one of the big law firms. I say, "Bill, we're back." He goes, "Where have you been?" Right? No one knew about it. On the other hand, you did have, some people did know about it. John had managed the campaign for Senator Fritz Hollings. We assumed he would be our defender. He was always outspoken. He didn't care what people thought, but he was just the opposite. He called his entire staff together, where John was scheduled to start work as soon as he got back, and told everyone, well, John has been busted for drug trafficking in Peru, and we're not going to take him back, and it's really important that no one speaks of this at all, right? Which is, you say that in Washington, it's like, it's like putting it on television, no one keeps a secret in Washington. So there were 3 great lessons about this trip. One is, never underestimate the value of a great story. So Alex heard the story for the first time when he was 5 years old. We could not have dinner with any adults where Alex was at the table, where the first thing out of his mouth was not, "Papa, tell them about the time you were in jail in Peru." And we were once on a cruise, where they kind of assign you to strangers, and we were assigned to this Detroit family, and they had two boys, Alex's age, and she was a big drive time radio star, right? And her husband was kind of a kept man. And Alex goes, "Papa, tell them about the time you're in jail in Peru." And they immediately are like this and go, "Oh no, you don't have to tell the story, sometimes we would get that reaction. But I've probably told this story 300 times. And it's a great story. And people have enjoyed it. The second thing was, you never know who your friends are. So like we expected Hollings would take up our cause and pressure the State Department to do something about this situation. Just the opposite. The two people who were probably the least likely, in my advanced estimation, to take up force were Senator Jim Sasser in Tennessee, who I knew and I had a relationship with, but he was kind of a very timid senator, and you wouldn't expect him to get on the phone and lobby on this issue, but he did. He did, and he lobbied hard. And in the end, the consul, who I had met with first on that first day, was removed from her position. The other person who pitched in was Senator Stennis, a senator from Mississippi. He was in his mid to late 80s. He had been there since 1946. He was a little senile, but he was good friends with my godfather in Jackson, Mississippi, and he got on the phone and pressed the State Department. Al Gore, I never expected him to raise his hand or try to do anything. It was just not his personality. So you never know who your friends are. The third thing is, when something like this happens, it changes your perspective on a lot of things. So I'm back in Washington on. I'm back in Washington. I've been back about a week, and I'm driving around, and a story comes on the radio. And the story is about Julian Bond, who was kind of a big civil rights figure in Georgia. And someone had caught him in a out of marriage affair, or maybe he was taking drugs. I can't remember exactly what it is. But if I'd listened to that story before I ever went to Peru, my reaction would be, "Ha! They caught him," right? I listened to that and I thought, that poor son of a bitch. He was probably framed. And so, that's my Peru story. It's, people go, "Oh, you were in jail in Peru. It must have been the worst thing in the world." But I have joyously told this story again and again, and I'm so happy it happened that and that I've had this great story to tell.
And I'm very happy that we have it recorded now and can send it to anyone who wants to hear it. Yeah, I think that's it. I think I'm glad we did all this and had a great conversation and got to hear more stories about Peru and your childhood and all of this. It's been fantastic.